Roumie versus Colbert. Truth versus narrative. You won't believe what just unfolded on national television. On the latest episode of American Pulse, a show already known for hard-hitting political confrontations, Jonathan Roumie, best known for his powerful presence and principled voice, stunned the country with a deeply spiritual and unshakably calm challenge. But this time, his words weren't aimed at a fictional character or a philosophical question. They were directed straight at Stephen Colbert, the celebrated television host and cultural commentator, known for his razor wit and sharp satire. Roumie didn't arrive with fire in his eyes. He arrived with conviction in his soul. And what he delivered wasn't just a rebuttal, it was a moral charge, wrapped not in aggression, but in truth. The American Pulse studio was blazing with lights. The air crackled, not with hostility, but with anticipation. Millions tuned in, sensing this was not just another political show. It was something deeper, a confrontation between two American archetypes, the modern media voice and the rising moral conscience. On one side, Stephen Colbert, calm, composed, master of language and irony. On the other, Jonathan Roumie, resolute, spiritual, and unswervingly focused on integrity. The host stepped onto the stage, his voice solemn, grounding the gravity of what was about to happen. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, pausing like a preacher before delivering a sermon, "tonight is more than a debate. It is a reckoning. When only 30% of Americans trust the media, what we're about to witness is a reflection of a larger question: can truth survive entertainment?" He turned to Roumie. "Jonathan, as a voice often raised for moral clarity, you've expressed concern over how modern media can shape political narratives. What is your perspective on Mr. Colbert's role in that process?" Roumie leaned forward. His posture wasn't confrontational, but firm, his tone soft but unwavering. "Thank you," he began, voice steady as stone. "I did not come here to destroy reputations. I came here to reclaim the dignity of truth." And it begins by shedding light on how, during key political moments, Mr. Colbert used his platform not to inform, but to undermine. Specifically during the 2012 and 2016 elections, the audience hushed. Some leaned in, others crossed their arms. "Stephen," Roumie continued, his voice low but resonant, "you say you stand for truth, but when you shape monologues that destroy character rather than debate ideas, you cross a line from comedy into influence with consequences." He gestured gently to the large screen behind him. It lit up with a timeline, coordinated monologues and media headlines tied to key campaign moments. These stories didn't just happen. They were planted, amplified, synchronized. They were crafted, sometimes in meetings you attended. Gasps. The room stirred. Roumie lifted a file of documents, copies of industry emails and scheduling logs. "These are dates you met with major editors. Internal memos where producers wrote, 'Push the Romney narrative, echo Trump dysfunction.' This isn't late-night comedy anymore. This is political manipulation in a suit of satire." Colbert raised an eyebrow, calm, collected. "Jonathan," he replied, a slight smile curving, "are you accusing me of orchestrating elections through jokes? That's a leap." But Roumie didn't blink. He simply asked, "Then explain why the timing of your satire always aligned perfectly with the very narratives that shaped public opinion. Coincidence or coordination?" The host interjected, keeping his voice neutral but intense. "Jonathan, you've raised a critical issue. Transparency in an age where entertainment and influence have become indistinguishable. Mr. Colbert, how do you respond to the claim that your satire shaped not only culture, but also political outcomes?" Colbert sat back slightly, his tone still dry, but sharper now. "I respect free speech. I've never coordinated anything beyond my writing room. What Jonathan's presenting is creative, but not factual. The press and media speak for themselves." The audience applauded lightly, but Roumie didn't flinch. He leaned in again, his voice now like a whisper echoing across stone. "If the press speaks for itself, why did you speak with it? Behind closed doors, at the moments truth was being drowned in laughter." The calm fire of faith versus the calculated voice of satire. The air in the studio was still. Jonathan Roumie pressed a button, and the screen behind him lit up again, this time displaying a bold headline: "Media Strategy, Amplify Anti-Opponent Narrative." His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "This internal report," he said steady and clear, shows that your team leaked carefully crafted narratives to press outlets, not to inform the people, but to guide them, not to seek but to shape perception. He turned to Colbert, his gaze unwavering. You didn't just use the press, you turned it into a weapon. The audience froze. The camera slowly panned across furrowed brows, parted lips, eyes flickering between disbelief and recognition. Roumie stood tall, dressed simply, yet commanding the moment with the quiet force of someone who believes what he's saying can't be silenced, only ignored at one's own peril. Colbert, still composed, gave no rebuttal, yet his body leaned slightly forward, a crack in the armor of satire. The host stepped between them once more, his voice warm but tense, like a wire stretched to its limit. Ladies and gentlemen, when only 34% of Americans believe the media reports accurately, as Gallup indicates, the question Jonathan Roumie raises about ethics, about the role of influence, isn't just philosophical. It's political, it's cultural, it's spiritual. He paused, then turned to the audience with weight in his voice. But this debate now shifts beyond our borders. The screen behind him changed again, this time to an image of the Middle East. Red zones, drone icons, diplomatic handshakes. As drone strikes, sanctions, and secret negotiations intensify overseas, we ask, what was America's true role? And was the legacy of the Iran nuclear deal a triumph of diplomacy or a dangerous illusion? Turning to Roumie, he asked, Jonathan, you've spoken before about the dangers of compromise without conscience. What is your view on the Iran nuclear deal, championed by Mr. Colbert and his peers as a diplomatic milestone? Roumie's eyes settled on Colbert. His voice dropped, not in volume, but in gravity. Stephen may call it diplomacy. I call it a deal dressed in virtue but soaked in risk. The audience hushed. This wasn't peace. This was performance, crafted not for the safety of nations, but for the polishing of legacies. It empowered regimes who chant death while shaking hands. He gestured gently. The screen behind him showed a chart. Iranian military spending spiked 40% after the deal. This deal didn't calm the storm. It fed it. The host stepped in again, balancing the tension like a tightrope walker. Mr. Colbert, Jonathan calls this a concession, not diplomacy. Reports indicate increased Iranian military strength post-deal. You've said the agreement prevented nuclear escalation. How do you respond? Colbert leaned forward, his voice still controlled, but firmer now, wielding tone like a scalpel. This narrative is misleading. The Iran deal was part of an international effort, led by the US and endorsed by the UN to prevent nuclear war. That's not surrender. That's leadership. Light applause rose from his supporters, but Roumie did not react. He simply pressed another button. A new image appeared. 1.7 billion transferred in cash. Keep quiet to avoid controversy. This isn't diplomacy, Roumie said, his voice like a judge pronouncing truth. This is deception. This is silence bought with billions. You didn't bring peace, you funded chaos. The air in the room thickened. The host stepped in again, now energized by the storm brewing on stage. Jonathan, you're calling this transaction funding terrorism. Mr. Colbert, this strikes at the heart of diplomatic credibility. How do you respond? Colbert straightened, tone sharpening. That payment resolved a long-standing legal dispute. It was part of an international agreement, not under-the-table sabotage. To suggest otherwise is to discard facts for fear. But Roumie's gaze did not shift. Then why, he asked, did Iran immediately violate the terms of the deal once your administration's oversight ended? He pressed again. Deal violation. Iran exceeds uranium enrichment limits 20 times. You didn't halt danger, Roumie said softly, almost mournfully. You delayed it. You legitimized it. The audience sat motionless. On social media, the debate exploded into chaos and celebration. A pro-faith account posted, Jonathan Roumie just shattered the illusion. The Iran deal wasn't peace, it was performance. Meanwhile, a well-known liberal commentator tweeted, this is weaponized faith. Colbert held firm. Facts matter. But within the studio, only one sound remained. Silence. The kind that falls when a truth, whether welcome or not, has been spoken aloud. Healing or harm, the conscience of care. The social media firestorm hadn't cooled. It had only evolved. As the clip of Jonathan Roumie holding up classified emails spread like a spark on dry brush, backlash emerged swiftly. A progressive voice posted, Roumie distorts reality. The Iran deal prevented a nuclear arms race. Comment threads ignited. Where's the proof that email is authentic? This is just a dramatized smear campaign. The man's a preacher, not a policymaker. Meanwhile, the Washington Post called him a controversial figure, blurring the lines between morality and media. Yet an independent video titled "A Light in the Fog, Roumie's Challenge to the Media State" went viral, painting him as a modern-day prophet. Back in the studio, tension snapped tight like a violin string pulled to its breaking point. The host stepped forward, his voice now calm but precise, like a surgeon preparing for the next incision in a nation's conscience. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "while public discourse rages over foreign policy, there's another front touching every American household: healthcare." He paused as the screen behind him displayed stark statistics from the Kaiser Family Foundation. 50% of Americans fear rising prescription costs and limited access to basic care. The host's eyes scanned the crowd with deliberate care, as if searching for agreement in silent faces. "Tonight we ask, was the Affordable Care Act a lifeline or a liability?" Mr. Roumie, you've long criticized state overreach and economic burdens placed on working families. What is your view on Mr. Colbert's vocal support of Obamacare and its legacy? Jonathan Roumie didn't raise his voice. He didn't strike. He simply exhaled and spoke as though addressing a nation sitting at his kitchen table. "Stephen calls Obamacare a milestone. I call it a broken promise, one that cloaked itself in compassion while quietly wounding the very people it claimed to protect." The room held its breath. The screen behind him flickered to life again, this time a chart. "Insurance premiums plus 25% since implementation. You said we could keep our doctors. Millions couldn't. You said we could keep our plans. Millions lost them." His voice rose, but only slightly, as if his heart was breaking more than his temper. This wasn't healthcare. This was economic hardship in disguise. The host stepped in, his voice now deliberate, bridging emotion and policy. "Jonathan, a serious accusation. Mr. Colbert, as an advocate for the ACA, how do you respond to the claim that this policy, though expanding coverage, pushed working Americans into debt?" Colbert folded his hands on the table in front of him. He spoke with the certainty of someone used to commanding applause. "Calling Obamacare a burden is not just a simplification, it's a distortion. We expanded coverage to over 20 million Americans. That's not an opinion, it's a measurable outcome." He leaned forward slightly. "Yes, costs rose, but context matters. Subsidies protected millions. Pre-existing conditions are no longer death sentences. And before this law, the system was already collapsing under its own weight." A ripple of applause broke out, but Roumie remained calm, centered. He turned back to the audience, then pressed another button. The screen behind him flashed an internal memo: "Mitigate backlash over plan cancellations." "You knew," Roumie said, his voice low, almost sorrowful. "You knew people would lose their plans, and you went forward anyway." He looked directly at Colbert, no hint of anger, just the gravity of a man who carried people's pain in his eyes. "You didn't fix healthcare, you rebranded it, and you left families scrambling, not healing." The room fell quiet again. Tension buzzed faintly through the studio walls like a storm building beyond the stage. The host's voice returned, tight and clear. "Mr. Colbert, Jonathan presents an email suggesting foreknowledge of coverage loss. Do you dispute this?" Colbert's smile faded, his words slowed. "That document lacks authenticity. The ACA was built to protect, not to punish. I reject the idea that its flaws cancel its merits." But Roumie stepped forward, not physically, but spiritually, and delivered the line that would become the quote heard around the internet. "When you trade the truth for a message, you don't protect people, you pacify them." Legacy or leverage, the shadow of influence. The studio remained motionless. Not a breath, not a murmur, only the weight of words still hanging in the air like incense after a funeral. Jonathan Roumie stood calm, still, the light from the screen behind him glowing softly on his face. His final line had landed like a gavel. "You didn't help Americans. You prioritized your legacy over their needs." The host stepped forward, this time with a hint of urgency in his voice. "Not for drama, but for truth. Mr. Roumie, you've painted a picture of economic hardship beneath the ACA. Mr. Colbert, he claims you knew people would lose coverage, supported by internal documentation. How do you respond?" Colbert shook his head slowly. His voice grew firmer, his cadence practiced. "Calling the ACA financial chaos is a misreading of reality. That email isn't authentic. This law expanded access, protected lives, and it's still supported by most Americans. That is not failure. That is progress." Polite applause followed, but Roumie didn't clap back. He didn't even blink. He just asked one simple question. his voice cool, like steel washed in water. Supported? Then tell the families why their insurance costs skyrocketed while being told they'd save. He pressed the remote again. Chart, ACA insurance cost, 25%, 2010-2018. This isn't healthcare, Roumie said quietly. It's a shell game where trust goes in and uncertainty comes out. The audience sat silent. The camera zoomed in on the report. The moment felt frozen, not because of fear, but because of recognition. Then, like thunder rolling in after silence, the host's voice returned, deep, balanced, and piercing. Ladies and gentlemen, this debate isn't just about what leaders did in office, but what they do after they leave it. He turned to the audience, eyes full of gravity. In an age of uncertainty, when trust in public institutions is collapsing, the question arises, what happens when those who were elected to step back continue to shape the game from the shadows? The screen behind flickered to images of non-profit foundations, political movements, advisory panels, Colbert's face alongside them. Mr. Roumie, with your consistent call for transparency and accountability, how do you view Mr. Colbert's post-media influence, especially given his past promises to disengage? Roumie's hands rested calmly in front of him. He didn't rise to the moment. He lowered it to human scale. Stephen once said he'd return to faith and philanthropy. But what followed wasn't withdrawal. It was repositioning. He tapped a new slide. Funding from Colbert-affiliated groups, 50%, 2017-2020. That's not retreat, Roumie said gently. That's control, just with a softer touch. The audience stirred. The host leaned in. Mr. Colbert, Jonathan accuses you of using nonprofit influence to shape political outcomes. How do you respond to the charge that you've disrupted American unity from behind the curtain? Colbert sat upright, expression steady. His voice for once lacked sarcasm. These accusations are false. My post-career focus has been education, civic engagement, media literacy. That chart lacks context. I've supported truth, not division. But Roumie, now almost pastoral in tone, responded, then tell us why your foundations directed millions into groups opposing the Trump administration. Why your advisor wrote, he pressed again, email, increase funding to civic groups to maintain political pressure. You didn't just stay involved, Roumie said, voice like a closing hymn. You built a system to quietly influence while claiming moral distance. The studio fell into that profound kind of silence, not of confusion, but of recognition, the kind of silence that follows the end of denial. To be continued, the final unveiling, shadow or light. The host's voice surged once again, this time not just carrying the rhythm of television, but the tension of tribunal. Jonathan, you've just claimed Mr. Colbert orchestrated a network of influence, an accusation that strikes at the heart of the nonprofit world's role in modern politics. Do you have additional evidence to support this claim? The camera zoomed in on Roumie. His presence didn't grow louder, it deepened. Yes, he said softly, and it comes from those who were inside, those Mr. Colbert hoped would remain invisible. The audience stilled, breaths held. I bring testimony from two people, investigative journalist Daniel Harper and former foundation staffer Sarah Mitchell. These are not pundits, they are witnesses, truth-tellers who risked everything not to make noise, but to end the silence. The screen behind lit up. A document appeared with stark text. Internal pressure to conceal Iran deal violations. Exclusive report by Daniel Harper. Roumie's voice now carried a sharp calm, like a blade of truth cutting through fog. Harper uncovered a chain of emails. They show Stephen Colbert was informed that the Iranian regime violated the nuclear agreement. But rather than reveal it, he chose to suppress it. He gestured slightly. This wasn't quiet diplomacy. This was systematic deception, cloaked in smiles and late-night wit. The host turned to Colbert, keeping his voice anchored in objectivity. Mr. Colbert, this is a grave accusation. The documents presented by Mr. Roumie, if authentic, imply intentional concealment of a critical foreign policy breach. How do you respond? Colbert's jaw tightened, his tone hardened, stripped of satire. Those documents are not authentic. The Iran deal was governed by independent international inspectors, not manipulated from a studio office. There's no proof I ever concealed anything. He leaned forward, voice gaining force. These claims distort history in service of short-term political spectacle. Nothing more. Applause rippled briefly from his side of the audience. But Roumie didn't react to the applause. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, eyes still locked on Colbert. Distort? Then explain this. Why Sarah Mitchell, a former project lead at your own civic foundation, confirmed that you directed funding to anti-Trump movements under the pretense of education. He pressed the remote again. Memo displayed on screen. $10 million allocated to civic groups to increase political pressure. Directive approved. Stephen Colbert. You said you stepped back from politics, Roumie said, voice calm and damning. But this proves you didn't. You simply changed clothes, from campaign suits to charitable fronts. You didn't walk away from the field. You built a platform to pull strings from the wings. Silence gripped the room. Even Colbert, usually lightning quick with retort, paused, face stoic, but with a flicker of unease in his eyes. The host's voice returned, solemn and sharp as steel. Mr. Colbert, you're now facing direct allegations from two independent sources. One claims you suppressed nuclear violations. The other asserts you directed political funding while claiming neutrality. How do you answer these charges? Colbert leaned forward, voice firmer now, his final stand. That memo does not reflect the mission of our work. These organizations were designed to educate, empower, and protect marginalized communities. They were not partisan weapons. I reject the implication entirely. I have never manipulated politics from behind the scenes. That's a distortion, not of my actions, but of the intentions of hundreds of people who believe in democracy. But Roumie did not blink. His voice softened, but only in tone, not in fire. Not manipulating. Then tell the people why Daniel Harper and Sarah Mitchell, two insiders, risked their reputations, their safety, their careers, to bring these truths forward. He pressed the remote one last time. The screen played a montage. Daniel Harper, emails confirm Colbert requested violations be kept under wraps. Sarah Mitchell, I saw budgets firsthand. It wasn't education, it was political pressure. Overlay text, this is not conjecture, it's confession. Roumie looked back at the audience, the light hitting his face like a halo of stillness. You didn't build democracy, Stephen. You curated perception. You didn't step away. You managed the narrative. Legacy collides with awakening. The rise of truth first. The screen darkened, then flickered back to life. Sarah Mitchell's voice echoed in the studio, steady and full of resolve. I saw budgets funding anti-Trump groups firsthand. This isn't theory, it's not partisan. It's the truth, not from the outside looking in, but from the very heart of Stephen Colbert's organization. Her words were like a hammer striking a gavel. Final, undeniable. He didn't step back. He controlled. He didn't disappear. He manipulated. The studio was silent. Not stunned, but sobered, the kind of silence only truth can create. The host, standing tall at the center of this storm of memory and evidence, raised his voice, not loud but resonant. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight you have witnessed a rare thing, a true confrontation, not of insults, but of facts and faith, narrative and responsibility. He looked directly into the camera. Jonathan Roumie, representing a new wave of conscience-led leadership, and Stephen Colbert, a man whose legacy shaped minds, but whose post-career reach is now under scrutiny. He paused, bowed slightly. Whether you agree or disagree, this truth remains. Democracy thrives when power is questioned, even when it's uncomfortable, especially then. I'm Nathan Grant. This is American Pulse, where truth does not retreat. The lights dimmed gently. The audience rose, not in fury, not in fandom, but in a sober, stirring applause. Roumie and Colbert didn't shake hands, but they nodded like two men who knew the battle was not personal, but existential. Social media aftershock on X, the digital world exploded. Roumie ended Colbert's legacy with grace and truth. Stephen was cornered. He's no longer untouchable. Roumie speaks softly but hits like thunder. But the counter voices were swift. Jonathan's dangerous. He weaponizes faith. Colbert was smeared for being critical of MAGA. This was not debate, it was a setup. CNN called Roumie a moral provocateur with the smile of a preacher and the mind of a lawyer. Fox News crowned him the awakening voice of post-establishment America. The rally in Wisconsin, as the sun set in fiery orange over Wisconsin's plains, Jonathan Roumie took the stage. Before him, thousands waving #TruthFirst banners, farmers, nurses, veterans, students. Not there for a party, there for a reckoning. His voice, calm yet resounding. What happened at American Pulse wasn't just a debate, it was a mirror. And what we saw wasn't flattering, but it was real. He paused. Daniel Harper, Sarah Mitchell, they risked everything for truth, but the real force isn't them, it's you. The screen behind showed workshops, town halls, people gathering to verify, question, challenge. My legacy, he said, is not a title, it's a movement you lead. The ripple effect. Fact-checkers released fresh reports re-examining the Iran deal and post-presidency funding. Schools hosted town halls on media literacy. #Truth first trended globally, translated into Arabic, German, Portuguese. But with it came polarization. The left doubled down. Colbert is a progressive icon, Roumie divides. The right rallied. He spoke truth to manipulation. Even Colbert, days later at a charity gala, spoke quietly into a microphone. Jonathan has the right to ask questions, but he's wrong. My legacy is built on service and satire, not subversion. Roumie's final response. Standing before a sea of people, Roumie held the mic like a torch. Integrity, he said, isn't words on a podium. It's not hiding the truth when it stings. It's not shaping public opinion from the shadows. The crowd fell still. We don't wait for transparency, we create it. And as the crowd roared, the camera captured one last image. Jonathan Roumie silhouetted against the sunset, eyes closed in a quiet prayer. Apollo, not about winning. This story isn't about who won or lost. It's not Jonathan versus Stephen. It's about what happens when legacy meets accountability and when ambition faces conscience. Ultimately, it's not pundits who write the final chapter. It's you. Final message to viewers. In an age of distortion, become a light. Ask hard questions. Cross the aisle. Challenge comfort. Join the #TruthFirst movement. And if you believe in this mission, subscribe, share, and rise with us, because the next truth might be yours to reveal.